Hello, love. Welcome back to the Organic Marketing Simplified. Today, I have such a juicy episode for you because I'm dishing out the 3 pieces of advice that I've heard that have totally made me cringe. And trust me, there are way more things that make me cringe in this podcast space. But this 3, they really hit a nerve. Before we start, I just have a disclaimer for you. Number 1, my kids are extremely happy and excited, and yeah, they're just kids having fun. They are downstairs with the nanny, so you might hear them laughing and giggling and running around. I'm not sure. Also, it's raining, so you might hear a little bit of raindrops in the background, but hey, listen, we're here for the content. So let's get into it, my love, and let's talk about the things that make me cringe, and hopefully you will not fall prey to this really bad advice floating around the interwebs. All right, let's start. First of all, number 1, it is when people ask, what is the best way for me to grow my podcast, for me to get more downloads, for me to get more listeners, for me to whatever, fill in the blank, whatever has to do with podcast growth. And I see this a lot in Facebook groups. People will say TikTok and Reels and, social media. And I'm just like, it's a podcast. You grow a podcast inside of a podcast, because when me, the user, if I go on Instagram, if I go on TikTok, I have a very different mindset than when I go to the podcast app. So if I'm going on Instagram, if I'm going on TikTok, I want to be entertained. I want to stalk somebody. Let's just call it for what it is. I want to kill some time. I'm bored. I just want to see what's going on, mindlessly scrolling, which, by the way, these are the reasons why I don't have Instagram anymore, and it's the reason why I never even signed up for TikTok. I think I did sign up for a TikTok account, and I was there for 5 minutes. I'm like, this is not for me, because it's just way too distracting, and I just don't have that kind of bandwidth and time, and it was super overwhelming. But anyway, the point is, I think, listen, if you want to recycle your podcast into these platforms, 100% go for it. Okay, go for it. I am such a supporter of you recycling, first of all, making your podcast the top tier of your content creation, and then from there you extract everything else. So think of a triangle. At the top of that triangle is your podcast, and then coming down off of that triangle is your blog posts, your captions, your emails, your reels, your TikToks, your whatevers. They're coming off of the podcast, because the podcast is a powerful platform. So instead of you creating all this content for all these places, create one main thing, which is the podcast. And then from there, you can pull content out of it. But to think that you're going to grow your podcast by doing more TikToks and by doing more Reels, no, you're growing your leadership, your thought leadership in these platforms, but you're not growing your podcast by putting this type of content on Instagram or TikTok or whatever social media is out there, whatever newest and greatest, which there's always a new one coming out. So how to grow your podcast? You grow your podcast by focusing on SEO. If you have been hanging out with me, you knew I was going to say this, didn't you? So focusing on SEO. You can be a guest in other people's podcasts, but SEO is going to be the number 1 way for you to grow your podcast, because when you focus on SEO, there's just a cascade of things that happen organically within the podcast app, within Google, that just really put you up in the algorithm and really push your content forward. So the minute that you focus on SEO, which say this a billion times, but in case you're new around here, when I mean SEO in terms of podcasting, it is 1,000 times easier than website with SEO and all those things. It will not take you a year for you to rank your podcast, whereas on a website, it's very possible you could, So the point is, you grow your podcast by focusing on a podcast, by, of course, creating really amazing content that is, of course, at the core of it all, but focusing on SEO, being a guest on other people's podcasts. By focusing on the podcast itself, that's how you grow your podcast. It's not by doing this extra things in every single other platform out there. That's really not going to help you any. I am so sorry, but you may be able to drive some traffic. Let's say, you have a reel or a TikTok go viral, or maybe a couple of them. You may be able to drive some of the traffic over to your podcast, and I'm not gonna deny the power in that, but do not rely on that alone to grow your podcast. So focus on SEO. I have a free course for you, by the way, that I leave linked for you in the show notes. You can go ahead and grab that and really get a pretty good grasp on SEO. However, if you want to go deep and you just want the complete shortcut, because other than SEO, there are other things that we focus on to grow the podcast, that I invite you to join me inside of Rock Your Podcast, which is my course, which is all the knowledge that I have gathered, one, as a podcaster myself with over 3 years of podcast experience, but also the knowledge that I have gathered from being a podcast management agency owner and getting to do this for all my clients, so getting their podcasts to rank on Apple from day one, getting them to rank on Apple with their keywords rather quickly, and getting them to get clients and grow their thought leadership and all those things because of the podcast. So all of that, the juicy information is inside of Rock Your Podcast. And if you're launching your podcast and you want to start from the beginning, like just doing everything right, then there's Rock Your Podcast Launch. I will leave those two linked in the show notes for you down below so you can go check them out. But that is like the shortcut, in a few hours, everything you need to do to have an amazing top ranking podcast. So yeah, number one advice that makes me cringe is grow your podcast on social media. We're not doing that here. You're smarter than that, boo. Now you know. Okay, number two, and I've heard this so many times, and I can't believe people share this and they don't think about the advice that they're giving. Like, if they just gave it some thought, like literally 30 seconds worth of thought, they would understand that this is just really bad advice, which is, if so-and-so does it on their podcast, I should do it too. Now, if so-and-so is a big podcaster, right? If so-and-so has been podcasting for 5, 7, 10 years, and so-and-so has a huge email list, and so-and-so is known in their space, like you throw out their name and people know exactly who you're talking about, and you want to copy their strategy, it's not going to work for you, boo, because we are like little tiny fish and this big pond. And if you want to stand out, you need to not copy what big podcasters are doing just because they're doing it, because they can do things that you and I can't. Okay, so if, let's just say Tim Ferriss, okay, let's say Tim Ferriss has a podcast episode and he wants to title the podcast episode with emojis. He's never done that, by the way, but I'm just throwing it out there. If he wanted to put out a podcast episode with emojis in the title, that podcast episode would still do well because it's Tim Ferriss and people know who he is. And he's been around the block for I don't know how many years. And he has earned his stripes. I mean, his podcast has millions and millions of downloads. So if you try to take all of his strategies and apply it to your podcast, it's not going to work, So what this looks like is people that will copy somebody else's show description. They'll see how somebody else is citing their episodes, even though, like I said, when you and I are podcasting, and I say you and I because I am also a small podcaster. I have a very successful business because of my podcast and because I know how to leverage my podcast, but I'm not getting distracted by what everybody else is doing, So when you and I are podcasting and we're titling our podcast episode titles, there's strategy that goes behind it, and there's more thought that goes behind it. We have to think about, this is the number one way people are finding me organically. So I'm going to give my title some thought rather than just, throwing some random name on my title, some creative name that I think it's fun and cute, but nobody else gets it, So how else does this translate? Oh, doing like a lot of interviews on a podcast, so having an interview heavy podcast. Whereas you're trying to grow, say, your marketing agency, right? You're trying to grow your business and you're doing a lot of this interview podcast, that's really not going to help you. You really should focus on sharing your thoughts, thought leadership. You should be focusing on that. That's not to say that interviews don't have a time and a place, but if you want to, again, like in this example, if you have a marketing agency, or let's say you want to sell your services, maybe you are like a minimalist mom and you're a minimalist coach, and you want to get more clients that way. Maybe you are a non-toxic living coach. Maybe you want to grow your network marketing company. How you're going to grow is by sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and it's not by having just interviews on your podcast, which is what a lot of big podcasters end up doing. Another thing too is scripting your podcast episodes. Listen, if you want to script your podcast episode, I will help you. I will give you my best resources, everything that I know about podcast scripting. But I am still a fan of having some notes, some bullet points, and then going from there rather than just reading off of a script, because that puts you in a box. And then how does Holy Spirit come in and intervene and give you that Holy Spirit moment that you get to share because you're so focused on the script? So I'm a fan of, not scripting. I will guide you on scripting. I have a guide on how to script. However, I think free-flowing is the way to go. I've said enough about that. I have a whole episode on it. But again, if you want to script, I support you in your decision. But then again, think about the creativity and what you might be missing out from being so strict with your content. What is another way that this translates? I mean, there's so many other things that, or thinking, okay, this is a big one. Thinking that the only way you can monetize your podcast is through sponsorships. Because again, really big podcasters, they have, how many commercials they have on their show, like 3, 5, 7 commercials, right? So you think that the only way you can monetize your podcast is through sponsorships. That's not true. There's so many ways you can sponsor your podcast, So the next time that somebody tells you to see, oh, so-and-so does it, so you should do it too, rethink that. Like, who is so-and-so? How long have they been podcasting? How big is their list? How big is their influence, right? Before you start copying somebody else's strategy. Because you may find that it's not going to work for you, and rightfully so. It's not meant to work for you because you're trying to copy somebody's strategy when they are on I don't know, not even they're on they're on chapter 10 of their journey, and you're literally just starting. You're in chapter 1, 2, 3, so keep that in mind. Okay, number 3, and this is another big one. Another thing that makes me cringe is podcasting is easy money. Listen, I'll be the first one to tell you that podcasting is great for your influence. It's great to grow your business. It is a great way for you to make money. It's not easy money. It's not something that just happens overnight. It's not something that if you're not, listen, what I mean to say is, the short version is, podcasting for the sake of podcasting will not make you money. Okay? So you have to podcast with intention, because you just starting a podcast and speaking to a microphone, that in and of itself will not make you money, okay? So if you are trying to grow your business, whatever business that is, you monetize your podcast by talking about what it is that you do, and people, they get to know you, and they get to like you, they get to enjoy your expertise, and then they're like, okay, I'm ready to take the next step, right? For some people, it's like the first episode, they just know you're for them. And for some people, it takes a little bit more, and human beings are different. But to say that podcasting is easy money, that is wrong. You can make a whole lot of money. I grew my business entirely because of this podcast, okay? But I had strategy, right? I didn't just start talking about talking about my day and dilly-dallying on these episodes and just being blah-de-blah. I've been podcasting, I don't even know what episode I'm on, but I'm well over 300 episodes by this point. I've been podcasting consistently for over 3 years. So yes, it has taken strategy, has taken thought, and I don't make money just because I podcast, okay? Podcasting is my strategy. Podcasting is how I market my business. Podcasting is where all my time and energy and focus, all goes into the podcast. But it isn't just because I turn on the mic every single week and I just speak randomly. There's thought behind every little thing that I do, and there's strategy behind everything that I do. So again, reminder, podcasting for the sake of podcasting will not make you money. By the way, inside of my course, Rock Your Podcast and Rock Your Podcast Launch, there is a whole masterclass on how to monetize your podcast, and you get that as a bonus. And again, the information is linked for you down in the show notes. My love, I really hope that you have taken this really cringe advice and the opposite of the cringe advice, and now you understand what not to do and what to do. I have a ton of resources on this podcast that you can go ahead and binge and just consume. The advice that I give you is meant for the person who doesn't have a lot of time, who doesn't want to spend years on end or even like days on end on social media, doing all the crazy things and like trying all the different strategies and whatever shiny new strategies out there today. What I teach you is how to sustainably grow your business while you parent your kids, while you know, live your life without being a slave to your business, which unfortunately happens a lot as we become online business owners. We become business owners to have freedom, and then we turn around one day and we're like, gosh, I work a lot and I never stop and I'm always on my phone. And with podcasting, you get to be free from that. You get to just really enjoy showing up once a week, 2 times a week, 3 times a week if you want, and speaking from the heart, sharing some really valuable information and making an impact and growing your business. And as somebody who has been extremely burnt out before from like trying all the things and, you know, trying to be on social and trying every strategy out there, to finally podcasting and having the ease and flow of, you know, the world of podcasting, I can tell you that it's real, and it's just a matter of you trusting, right? The podcasting will work for you, but not in like a mindset kind of way, like trust and it'll happen. No, it's just actually putting your trust and putting your time and effort into this thing in a very objective way. You know, we're not talking about like manifesting, you know, that it'll work for you. It'll work for you if you do the right things. You know, that is the power of podcasting. You know, my love, until next time, may you find God's love, peace, grace, and mercy, and I'll see you in the next episode. Mwah. Bye.